afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Monroe Carmen. I am president of the Press Club and editor-at-large at Bloomberg Business News. I'd like to first welcome our members in the audience and their guests, as well as those of you watching on C-SPAN or listening to this program on National Public Radio or the Global Internet Computer Network. Before introducing our head table and guest speaker, I would like to remind our members of coming speakers. On Tuesday, April 25th, former presidential candidate Ross Perot will talk about his view of the way the United States should prepare for the 21st century. On Thursday, April 27th, Senator Bob Kerrey, Democrat from Nebraska, will address the question, do Democrats stand for anything anymore? That's his question, not mine. And on Tuesday, May 2nd, Senator Arlen Specter, Republican from Pennsylvania and a Republican and a candidate for the Republican nomination for president, will address the Press Club. Transcripts and audio and videotapes of Press Club luncheons are available by calling 1-800-500-9911. If you have any questions for our speaker, you'll find some cards on the table. Please write your questions on those cards, pass them up, and I will ask as many as time permits. Now I'd like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are mentioned. From your right, Paulo Henrique Amorim, U.S. Bureau Chief, TV Global Network of Brazil. Marlene Fernandez, Senior Washington Correspondent and Washington Bureau Chief, CNN Spanish. Paulo Sotero, o Estado de Sao Paulo. Flavia Secres, Journal do Brasil. Mel Levitsky, U.S. Ambassador to Brazil. Stan Kroc, News Editor for Business Week. Luis Felipe Lampreia, Brazilian Minister of External Relations. Skipping over our speaker for the moment, Mark Johnson, Media General News Service and Chairman of the National Press Club's Speakers Committee. Paulo Tarso Fletcher de Lima, Brazilian Ambassador to the United States. David Anderson, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and the member of our Speakers Committee who arranged today's luncheons. Thank you, David. Lisa Burgess of the Journal of Commerce. John Fogarty of Kiplinger's California Letter and past president of the National Press Club. Betsy Stewart, producer, NBC News, and Clay Chandler of the Washington Post. Our speaker today, it can be said, is a miracle worker of the highest rank. A year ago, as finance minister of his country, Fernando Henrique Cardoso slew the dragon of hyperinflation, a condition that had become a synonym for the economy of Brazil. His reward was election to his country's highest office. At one point, his poll rating soared to 70%, a popularity that would make any political leader envious. But that was before he took office this past January. In Brazil, it can be also said, one miracle is never enough. As President Cardoso discovered in his first 3 months in office, succeeding miracles can come harder to achieve than the original. His welfare reform proposal has run into trouble. His Social Security reform has aroused wide opposition. His current country's currency, the real, has been devalued, He's had to raise tariffs on a list of 100 popular consumer imports, including automobiles and appliances. Still, President Cardoso is known for his resourcefulness. Consider, he's just the second head of state in his country chosen by popular vote in the past 30 years. He presides even though his own Social Democratic Party, the PSDB, has just 10 members in a Senate of 81 and 64 members in a lower house of 513. He has dared to introduce free market reforms. He wants to open up state oil, telecommunications, and electrical monopolies to foreign investors. Free market reforms to an economy that has been hobbled for many, many years by an archaic constitution and suffocating regulation. As one Brazilian congressman put it, we have a Swedish constitution with an economy of Mozambique. If those challenges are not daunting enough, President Cardoso must also cope with the problems of urban crime, of protecting the Amazon basin ecosystem, and the extensive poverty in Brazil's major metropolitan areas. He certainly has the credentials to perform more miracles. Born in 1931, he received degrees in sociology and social sciences from the University of Sao Paulo. He left his country following the military takeover in 1964 to return in 1968. He founded a think tank to serve as the center of opposition to the military government, but he was barred from teaching. After spending years on the lecture circuit in Latin America and the United States, he entered the Brazilian Senate as an alternate in 1982. He first joined the center-left Brazilian Democratic Movement Party in 1983, but 5 years later left that party to help form his current party, the Brazilian Social Democratic Party. He served under the previous administration as foreign minister before becoming finance minister. Today, he will tell us about the challenges Brazil faces as it moves toward the 21st century. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm press club welcome to the Honorable Fernando Henrique Cardoso, the President of Brazil.
Mr. Monroe Carmen, President of the National Press Club, Mr. Mark Johnson, President of the National Press Club Speakers Committee, Mr. David Anderson, Member of the Board, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I have with me a document to be presented today, this morning, to you during lunchtime. I think I will prefer to circulate the document and to speak more freely, since I believe that in an interchange of opinions with members of the press, it's ever better to be more open. I know this is a tremendous danger, but I like to face challenges, so let's go. First, let me say to you that it's true what has been said, that of course, I'm president. I was senator, finance minister, foreign affairs. Before I was a professor, university professor. But I was also, I would say a journalist, because this would be badly admitted by my friends, Brazilian journalists. But maybe I start my political participation in Brazil writing to an oppositional paper named Opinião, many years ago. And then for several years, maybe even more than 1 decade, I used to publish articles in an important Brazilian newspaper once a week. So I know how difficult it is to write and I have an enormous respect for those who are living by serving the nation through his own rights and criticism, rumor, so on and so forth. I know that's very difficult, and I would like to begin my presentation by putting very clearly and expressing very clearly my profound respect for the role the press fulfill in democracies. And I would like to point out some very, very short points, some sort of very, a set of brief considerations about what's going on in Brazil and how I believe it's possible to work there in such a way that we can overcome some difficulties. Some of them have been already raised by the former speaker. Let me tell you that the real miracle in Brazil, to my mind, was not the stabilization program. It was democracy. Because it's very difficult, very, very difficult to maintain, to keep a democratic pattern in a country with high degrees of poverty in inequalities. It's very difficult. And we have been successful in the transition period from the authoritarian to the democratic regime because before democracy, democratic structures in Brazil, we had a sense of freedom. We were valuing freedom. And now we have freedom as a value in the country. Everybody is free to organize, to criticize, to try to participate, to invest, to travel abroad, to travel inside the country. We have an enormous atmosphere. The Brazilian atmosphere is an atmosphere, how can I put, totally devoted to freedom. And this is very important. Then we have also democratic institutions. This is not a novelty. Brazil was independent in early 19th century. We had an empire, a king, a crown, parliament, parties, so on and so forth. But in our century, after some military coup, the idea of democracy was rather doubtful in Brazil and in other countries. And from time to time, even some very important democracies were encouraging non-democratic governance because believe that maybe through non-democratic governance would be easier to combat, to fight against communism. Anyhow, this is the past. And in order to achieve democracy, freedom was very important. And the free press played an essential role in that matter. And nowadays, democracy is there. Not just, of course, a very important representative democracy. We have parties, we have elected president, elected congressmen, etc. But more than that, in our country now, I believe we have something like 5,000 non-governmental organizations, NGOs. 5,000. 1,500 dealing with environment, you can imagine. And all them becoming part of the Brazilian democratic process of decision taking. This is a routine, you know, in Brazil. We have unions. The unions are strong. The churches, very active churches, in some moments at least. You see? As I said, universities. So this is the real miracle. We have a democratic society. It is not just the fact that we have democratic institutions at the political level. We have a democratic society, a democratic able to put pressures on those who govern and to express people's demands. Is this what assures the possibility for a stable economic situation. It's not enough, but there's a solid basis for economic progress. Because I used to say, maybe to indulge with myself, that it is very difficult to keep in an error, in a mistake in Brazil, because the criticism prevents it. If I make a big mistake, well, it's a matter of days, and I have to reorganize my mind, review my decision. And this is not just in my case. This is a generalized situation, and this is very important. This is very important. It takes time. It requires strength. It requires very clear goals. And you have to continue to fight. But anyhow, this is the overall atmosphere in the case of Brazil. Then, within this situation, and in spite of the fact that Brazilian people react against corruption, the Brazilian, one of the former presidents suffered a process of impeachment. He had to abandon the government. The Congress itself purged some of the Congress members because of corruption. This is quite a novelty in modern world. Solid institutions are able to, to proceed in such a way, and we did. So, of course, after that, it's important also to emphasize that we have been successful not just in keeping inflation down, but much more than that, in, again, revitalize the Brazilian economy in such a way that economic growth is going on. In the last 3 years, the rate of growth was between 5 and 6% per year. 5 and 6%. We are exporting each month more. And the Brazilian government decided to open Brazilian markets, open the Brazilian economy. Brazil is a country with 160 million people. Brazil's GDP is bigger than the Russian GDP, than Russia. And all this has been built in a closed market with the idea of protection. Well, we took the decision that the time was coming to open the economy, to integrate Brazilian economy into the world economy, and we did. External tariffs, in average, have been reduced from 40 to 50%, a level of 14% in the last 4 years, very rapidly. And still, Brazilian economy is competitive. We are exporting, and our exports are basically toward industrialized goods, based on industrialized goods, 70%. And we are importing, as I said, but 70% of our imports now are composed by capital goods or raw material. So it's in order to expand the local capacity for production. So Brazil is a country with enormous vitality, energy, capacity to take decisions. And we have to face, and this is the miracle, the problem of inequality and poverty. How to keep democracy in a country open to the world, open to different, a range of influences, ideological influences, co-influences, a country which is all the time looking at TV sets and radio. Everybody's informed, and inequality is there. And the poor people know that this is not acceptable. So they have to put pressure on governments. And the government has the responsibility to decide in terms of priorities. And we have to say no or yes, depending on our possibilities to really solve problems. So very often I have to solve to very correct demands because it's impossible to cope with them. So there is only one way to do it appropriately, is to explain to the people. Why not? When? Why? And again and again. Even if the information is distorted by political interest or by ignorance, again, we have to explain. It's the only way. It's the only way. It's impossible to go ahead in a country like Brazil with economic development without democracy and without a sense of responsibility for those who are in power, who have to explain, to give accountability, if I can put it like that. Have to say to the people in a real way what is going on. This is what we are trying to do in Brazil. This is what we are doing. Of course, we have to reform the country. As has been said, I sent to the Congress several constitutional amendments, a set of amendments with respect to the economic order. Why? To break some monopolies, to turn Brazilian economy still more flexible and more open to investment, to compete better, to try not to discriminate local and foreigners if they are all producers. Well, it's obvious it will take some time to reach you know, the approval, because democracy is like that. We cannot pull a button and press a button. It's okay. That's it. The government, the president wants. No, it's not like that. You know better than in the United States how difficult it is to get a vote from the Congress. I used to say, I said this last 2 days, the difference is that I have a majority in Congress, non-organized majority. I think it's better to have a non-organized majority than an organized majority against. We have a non-organized supporting reforms. So it's a matter of patience. I'm not alone with others which are also interested in reforms. We have to explain. We have to appeal to the public opinion, and it takes time. But in government since January the 1st, 3 months and something, is nothing if we consider the long life of a nation. And the situation will require 4 years, all time, this is my term, 4 years, all time in a continuing process of reform. Reform is not an act, it's not a law, it's not a will, it's not the expression of a will. It's a process. We have to convince people, we have to change mentalities. It takes time. And it takes also energy. We have to be dedicated to that task. I am. And I'm not alone. I have people with me. I have the government. I have congressmen. We have here 2 from different parties. And we have ample support in terms of parties in the Congress. We will do the reform, the necessary reform. In the case of social security reform, well, it's a very difficult reform, as you know, because I have to deal with those interests, concrete interests for everybody. I have to discuss and to admit, to accept also some criticism, to change here. Otherwise, it would be not a democratic reform. Under the military regime, it would be easy to reform. For how long? So I think that we understand that in nowadays, what's important is a continued process of reform. The reform have to be really absorbed by the population, accepted by the population, not just a problem at the Congress to have some allies and to have some very sophisticated discussions. Much more than that. As for reforms are being made and will be successful in Brazil. As well as I'm absolutely convinced that in economic terms we have been able to overcome our previous difficulties. As I said, the economy is in very good shape, and I believe that this is basic even to get the necessary reforms, because the population understands the reason why. It's not difficult to understand why I was elected. Because, after the stabilization program, and opposition was enormous against the program too. But after the stabilization program, it was very easy for a common person to understand that it's good for them to stabilize, because inflation was undermining their condition of living, their power, their capacity to buy. They had no possibility to, well, even to estimate what could happen next month, because it depends on the rate of inflation. So the salaries, the wage were very vague in concrete terms. After stabilization, no less than $12 billion have been redistributed. They are in the people's pockets. They're a very concrete thing. That's why it was not a miracle. It was work, very hard work. Goodwill, bona fide, as you used to say. I prefer to say bona fide because it's Latin, but anyhow, bona fide. What can I do? Bona fide. If you have clear goals, you see, and capacity to explain it, to motivate people, that's all that's necessary for a country to really realize some reforms, and in a country willing to have reforms. So, of course, now I'm in the United States of America. Not because it's domestic questions. These I have to solve in Brazil, and I will do it. Because Brazil now believes that the time is coming to assume a more responsible partnership in the discussion of the worldwide programs and problems, such as, well, to what extent the Bretton Woods institution will correspond or are corresponding to the world cities in terms of financement, or in terms of balance aid, or in terms of turning more feasible the development of nations. We believe that Brazil has a say at that level of the discussion. On the other hand, how the world will keep peace in the future? By using United Nations. But what kind of United Nations? The rights of 5 countries, or searching ample legitimacy and including more nations in the decision-making process at that high universal level? We want to say something about it. And I had an excellent conversation with the American government, including President Clinton, and with President Clinton, which seems to me a very sensitive person. He knows about, he has a ample view of these problems, and he has a democratic mind, not just internally to the United States, but also regarding what's going on in the world. So I came to the States to say that Brazil is ready to be a partner. A partner means that we want to know in advance, hang on, what next, and to see to what extent we can support decisions. And if so, we are ready to participate in the efforts, including the peacekeeping efforts around the world. On the other hand, I think that in terms of Latin America, we also have a very external is a long tradition. We have 10 neighbors and excellent relate to our neighbors. We have now Mercosur, and Mercosur for us is basic. Our economy is integrated into the Mercosur system, which includes Argentina, Uruguay. We are expanding our contacts with Chile and Bolivia. Brazil proposed also what has been called at the beginning as the Amazonic Pact, or Amazonic Initiative, that is to say, to have a special economic relationship with those who are our neighbors in the region. So we are looking at South America as a whole, not to promote the isolation of South America or Brazil. On the contrary, to discuss on a much more grounded way to what extent the hemispheric free trade area could be constructed. For us, it's feasible, and it's not impossible what has been proposed at the Miami, that is to say in 2005, something like that, we will have this new economic free trade area integrating the hemisphere. This is feasible, but we believe that it's better to have sub-regional areas integrated. So this is what we want. This is our ideas. We believe that it's important to notice that this is the Brazilian, I don't know, new wave or new spirit, because this has been always our ideas in Brazil. So now we are in better shape to say that we are open to a very frank democratic dialogue internally and externally. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Now come the questions. Does your emphasis on Brazil's achievement as a democratic society and your declaration that Brazil is ready to take its place as a partner in the global hemisphere, is that a way of saying Brazil is no Mexico?
It's not necessary to say that Brazil is no Mexico. I respect and normalize Mexico, but we are different. Not because we are Mexican, they are Mexican, we are Brazilian, because we have different tradition, you know, in terms of the orientation, the kind of democracy we have, quite different. And then we have a difference in terms of our economies. The Brazilian economy is more industrialized. We cannot indulge with non-growth. In our growth is our destiny. We have to expand our economy. We export not mainly to the United States. We have 25% of our export are oriented toward Europe, 25% to the United States, the rest to Japan, Asia, South America. So we are global traders, and we have had in the last years enormous resources in our commerce, international.
Two questions. They each relate to visits you made during your visit here. Were any agreements reached with President Clinton during your talk? And secondly, were you seeking financial commitments from the banking community when you visited New York? And did any?
You are more doubtful about the American bank than myself, huh? No. My idea was not to have with President Clinton any specific, decision, but to have a very frank and open debate around some of the issues I raised here, mainly, the restructuring of the United Nations system, the financial system, and how to control, if possible, how to turn it more with more accuracy to understand what's going on in different countries, how to monitorize better the economic performance in different countries, and how to give to the international institutions as World Bank and IMF more possibilities, more, some maybe a facility, especially, I don't know if a special facility, but anyhow, more possibilities to cope with emerging financial problems. And President Clinton is in agreement with all these points. And on the other hand, have any specific issue to discuss with the American government. Maybe one or another point, this is normal in bilateral, but the ministers have to take care and not presidents. And with respect to the financial, to the bankers, we don't have any complaint with the banks. We have been successful in rescheduling our external debt. When I was finance minister, and the current finance minister is there, he was the man who made the negotiation, always with the foreign affairs support, and our agreement is quite good. We don't have any additional complaining in that area. On the contrary. So what we need is investment, direct investment in Brazil and financing for Americans to invest in Brazil. Brazilians.
Would Brazil, either now or in the foreseeable future, want to join NAFTA?
Oh, yeah. I think that, well, provide Mexico and Canada too. If NAFTA, and I believe NAFTA has a good chance to be a successful program, will continue. I think it will continue. Brazil it has already a dialogue named 4+1, which includes all partners in Mercosur discussing with NAFTA to see to what extent it will be possible to integrate our common interests.
Do the recent tariff measures that you've adopted threaten the success of Mercosur, that is the trade pact between Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay?
No, at all, because the increasing tariffs doesn't apply to Mercosur. Mercosur has another system of tariffs. And let me put very bluntly, too, that what we did was very simple. We were importing this year about $1 billion in luxurious cars. Well, this is too much. So we increased, but under the, I don't know the title of the new GATT, is OMG. They change every 10 years. But the new International Organization for Commerce, under the guidelines of this treaty, we had the right to increase some tariffs, and we did, very, as other countries do the same. I guess that the Federal Reserve increased by 1 point rate of interest. Well, because they believed it's good for the United States. We did the same, because we believe it's important at that point for Brazil. But this is a very temporary measure, just to keep the trade balance in equilibrium, nothing else.
Brazil's trade deficit shows a new deficit in March, this time of $900 million. When do you think this trend will be reversed?
Immediately. Because we stopped. Because we stopped the main cause of this deficit. But let me add an additional argument. This year, every month, we had records in our exports. Records, historical records. We are increasing. In March, we increased 28% compared to February. In February was higher than January. In January was, language 94, January was record in history. So we are expanding our exports. It was enough to take specific measures to control some imports, and the deficit is over. I hope.
A request, sir.
Yeah.
A request from the Spanish language stations, please, to respond in Espanol. In the wake of the Mexican peso crisis, how does Brazil respond to changing financial flows from foreign investors in regards to its market, and feel that the Real plan will have increasing difficulty because of Brazil's trade deficit? Espanol.
Bueno, vamos en castellano. Quizás sea más fácil explicar lo que no fue fácil. Lo que pasa es lo siguiente, la plata que viene a Brasil, la producción directa, los que hacen inversión directa, siguen creciendo. El año pasado fue otra vez un gran récord. Y este año más que el año pasado. Y cada vez que estoy en Brasil o aquí, que vienen los industriales o los dueños de bancos, de los sectores de servicios a hablarme, pues ¿qué es lo que viene a decirme? Que van a invertir más, van a poner más plata. Solamente en la industria de autos, de coches, bueno, se esperan cerca de $10.000 millones de aquí al año 2000. Una empresa como la Volkswagen, pues tomó la decisión que después de Alemania será Brasil, en términos del número de coches que van a ser construidos por Volkswagen de ahora hasta fines de siglo, pocos años más. Y eso es generalizado. Así que no hubo ninguna interrupción en el flujo de capitales. Hubo otra cosa, la cuestión del hot money, de la especulación. Aún así fue poco en lo que hace a Brasil. Y no hay nada, no tiene ninguna relación la cuestión del déficit de la balanza comercial. Tiene que ver con lo que yo dije acá, con la enorme capacidad de compra que el Plan Real produjo en Brasil. Tan fuerte que se estaba estimando en 6.000 millones de coches, 6.000 millones de dólares este año. O sea, eso es una prueba de la fuerza de la economía. Ahora, corresponde a los que están en el gobierno, sobre todo del área económica, con un ojo abierto hacia el futuro y decir, no, es demasiado. No hay que calentar tanto la economía porque si no eso va a producir un efecto negativo sobre la cuestión del control de la inflación. Entonces tomamos las medidas. La economía, perdónenme los que aquí están y son economistas, no es una ciencia solo, es también, pero es un arte. Hay que tener, más que arte, es una materia donde se requiere decisión, tener el valor del momento necesario, tomar decisión, aun cuando pueda parecer que no es popular, o cuando puede parecer que perjudica intereses ajenos. Y es lo que hicimos nosotros, así que yo no tengo ninguna duda de que el Plan Real tiene no solamente sólidas, porque lo tiene, sino también que la economía brasileña tiene amplias perspectivas de futuro, porque las tiene.
Gracias. How's about that?
Oh, you prefer, you speak in Spanish, I speak in English, huh? Now it's more balanced.
Recently, federal troops have had to be dispatched to control urban crime in Brazil. How is the situation now? And what do you tell tourists about going to Brazil when there is so much crime around? These are the tougher questions.
Yeah. You know, I don't know about the rate of criminality, but probably if you compare Detroit or Washington or New York with São Paulo, I don't know. I don't know who is has higher rates of criminality. This is not to deny the fact that we have a high rate of criminality in some urban areas in Brazil. But this is a very difficult problem to be dealt with. And the army is not directly involved in controlling criminality because the army was not organized and not trained to do this. What we are doing in Brazil is, in the case of Rio, the federal government made an agreement with local government to allow the army to take some responsibilities. And meanwhile, the local government is trying to improve the police. Police in Brazil is under the control of local governments, not the federal government. But the federal government cannot be blind, has to give a lift to governors when needed. And the way we had was, well, let's put the army, not directly involved in the crime control, but indirectly making parades and by being present in different difficult areas of the city to give us more safety to the citizens and to show that the state is there. This is no man's land. We have to control the area. And behind what happened mainly in Rio, but not just in Rio, is a problem of drug traffic. Brazil is not a drug producer. Brazil is, like you, a drug country, but modest in terms of consumption. We are a corridor, and through Brazil, well, those who consume drugs abroad, are being supplied. So this is very difficult to stop, It requires also borderline controls. It requires the improvement of federal police. It takes time, but we are, taking the appropriate measures to control it.
Well, several questions. As we're talking about crime, let's talk about corruption.
Yeah.
Will that ever be eliminated in Brazil so that true economic growth is possible without the distortions of corruption?
Well, again, you in the United States have enormous experience in dealing with corruption, you see, in the past. Enormous. The spoiled system, you remember? Do you? Long time ago. Yeah, you remember. It was not easy. It was not easy to control corruption, but you have been successful. You have been successful. So the same is true with respect to Brazil. After one process of, impeachment, based on accusations of corruption, it's a dramatic situation for the country and produced an earthquake of political manners. And again, the Congress was there fighting, and the press, all time, play a wonderful role. Well, since the last government, I never heard about one rumor about corruption. Nothing at all. Nothing. Zero. Can I say that corruption is completely out? No. I don't know, because it's very difficult. Can you say that corruption is not is completely controlled here or in France? No, I don't speak about France. Or in Spain? Or in Italy? So, but in our case, I can assure you that the organized corruption under the protection of the government doesn't exist. We have already finished with corruption. We are proud because of that.
All right, we've taken care of crime, corruption. Now, most of the states in Brazil are technically bankrupt.
Yeah.
Crime, corruption, and bankruptcy. Now, what measures are you taking to put their economies back into good order?
I think, I don't know, you said that after being able to control inflation, I was honored with the position of President of Brazil. Are you sure that it is an honor? Because with this description, I am afraid it's a terrible job to be accomplished. No, it's not like that. It's true that in some states, local banks have problems. What we did, we intervened in the banks. Maybe for the first time, in a very tough attitude, we decided to intervene in the banks and to privatize them, local banks. And as a whole, when IMF looks at an economy, the IMF is always considering also the budget, local, state budget situations, and the fact is that we are now, since years, in a process of having surpluses in the overall state expenses. So we are controlling. We are not in a situation of disarray at the local level. On the contrary, and I must say that the election of now, the last election, very good governors have been elected. I'm not referring because they belong to I have only 6 among 27 in my party. But altogether, it's a new generation of people, very good governors, and some very good local majors, very good, who have been trained, that know about. So again, we are in a mood of transition, you see, from a situation of badly organized in political terms toward another one, much more mature, much more in correspondence with democracy, and much more able to be accountable to the people.
Sorry about this.
Again?
Let's move on to inequality now.
Let's go.
What efforts are being made to address the plight of the black Brazilians and bring them into mainstream society and reduce the disparity in incomes?
Well, disparity in incomes, this is true. Have you read recent statistics about what's going on in the so-called former first world? Income is becoming more and more concentrated. So this is again a widespread problem. In our case, it's worse because we had a mass of poor people, and we need to compensate this. Mainly the so-called misery, pockets of misery. Okay. What can be done? First, offer more jobs. This is why I insist every day that we need to continue to grow. Our economy needs to offer more and more jobs. We reduced the unemployment rate to a level of 4%. 4% now, the last that is 4%. Well, that's not enough, because this corresponds to those who are already integrated into the labor market. So we have this so-called non-formal part of the economy. You have to take care of this part of sector of society. How? We have to enlarge primary education, to expand the chance for those who have not yet attended school to attend school. Now the school system is ample enough to absorb those who are at the corresponding age to be enrolled in public schools. But they are trained because teachers are badly paid because of poverty, general poverty in the country, because of fiscal, so on and so forth. This is a process. We are moving ahead. I myself went to a primary school in the state of here, Senator Magalhães was there, to give a class in a primary school, basic school, to show that the president is highly motivated toward a new approach to the educational programs. I was there. I visited several, 2 or 3 in different areas of the country, schools, to talk to teachers and then to the families, to motivate them, because it is again, it's a social process of transformation. It's not just a decision by the government, by the Congress. It's much more ample than that. So education, this is absolutely necessary to overcome in Brazil, because in the future, without knowledge, it will be impossible to get a job. Health. We have to improve health conditions. Our main program is around the decrease of infant mortality. Why? Because to decrease infant, it's needed better nutrition for the mother, for the babies. And again, better conditions of living in terms of sanitation, water, sewage, so on and so forth. It takes time. I cannot press a button, again. But we are in that, oriented toward that direction, and we will attain some goals in the, in the coming years. And fourthly, in some areas, we have to be motivated to have to ask the civilian society to help people, not just the government. Next week, I will publish a list of the 100 poorest towns in Brazil. And I made a strong appeal to Brazilian society, to the Brazilian government in dealing with the poverty problem, for businessmen, church and unions, students, so on and so forth, because the fight against poverty, against misery, cannot be only a political question or a governmental question. It's a national question. Maybe it's also an international question. So this is what I have in my mind, what we are trying to do.
Before we reach our famous final question, I have a couple of gifts for you, sir.
Oh, yeah.
First, you've endured a hard day, I know that.
No. It's a normal day.
A certificate of appreciation for appearing with us today, and we are deeply appreciative.
This is a certificate that was of appreciation. Thank you very much.
Here is a celebrated National Press Club coffee mug.
Brazilian coffee.
Brazilian coffee.
Fine. Please buy Brazilian coffee.
Or you can sell it off and try to reduce your trade debts.
Thank you very much.
Final question. Would you comment, please, sir, on the report that in exchange for financial aid that you have promised President Clinton that your country will let the United States mix world
Well, well, I don't know. Suppose I did. Do you believe you'll be able to win the World Cup? And my last information. You know, among my ministers, there is one who is Pelé. Pelé is Minister of Sport in Brazil. So I will propose a different, idea to you. Why not to ask the American government to play football soccer with Brazil government. And I asked Pelé to come again to the United States and to play a football. Let's see who will win the game. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That concludes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That concludes our luncheon today. We thank all of you in the audience and those who are watching on television for being with us. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, so we got through that. It was all right.
Mr. Monroe Carmen, President of the National Press Club, Mr. Mark Johnson, President of the National Press Club Speakers Committee, Mr. David Anderson, Member of the Board, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I have with me a document to be presented today, this morning, to you during lunchtime. I think I will prefer to circulate the document and to speak more freely, since I believe that in an interchange of opinions with members of the press, it's ever better to be more open. I know this is a tremendous danger, but I like to face challenges, so let's go. First, let me say to you that it's true what has been said, that of course, I'm president. I was senator, finance minister, foreign affairs. Before I was a professor, university professor. But I was also, I would say a journalist, because this would be badly admitted by my friends, Brazilian journalists. But maybe I start my political participation in Brazil writing to an oppositional paper named Opinião, many years ago. And then for several years, maybe even more than 1 decade, I used to publish articles in a...
As finance minister of his country, Fernando Henrique Cardoso slew the dragon of hyperinflation, a condition that had become a synonym for the economy of Brazil. His reward was election to his country's highest office. At one point, his poll ratings soared to 70%, a popularity that would make any political leader envious. But that was before he took office this past January. In Brazil, it can be also said, one miracle is never enough. As President Cardoso discovered in his first 3 months in office, succeeding miracles can come harder to achieve than the original. His welfare reform proposal has run into trouble. His Social Security reform has aroused wide opposition. His current country's currency, the real, has been devalued. He's had to raise tariffs on a list of 100 popular consumer imports, including automobiles and appliances. Still, President Cardoso is known for his resourcefulness. Consider, he's just the second head of state in his country chosen by popular vote in the past 30 years. He presides even though his own Social Democratic Party, the PSDB, has just 10 members in a Senate of 81 and 64 members in a lower house of 513. He has dared to introduce free market reforms. He wants to open up state oil, telecommunications, and electrical monopolies. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Monroe Carmen. I am president of the Press Club and editor-at-large at Bloomberg Business News. I'd like to first welcome our members in the audience and their guests, as well as those of you watching on C-SPAN or listening to this program on National Public Radio or the Global Internet Computer Network. Before introducing our head table and guest speaker, I would like to remind our members of coming speakers. On Tuesday, April 25th, former presidential candidate Ross Perot will talk about his view of the way the United States should prepare for the 21st century. On Thursday, April 27th, Senator Bob Kerrey, Democrat from Nebraska, will address the question, do Democrats stand for anything anymore? That's his question, not mine. And on Tuesday, May 2nd, Senator Arlen Specter, Republican from Pennsylvania and a Republican and a candidate for the Republican nomination for president, will address the Press Club. Transcripts and audio and videotapes of Press Club luncheons are available by calling 1 to foreign investors. Free market reforms to an economy that has been hobbled for many, many years by an archaic constitution and suffocating regulation. As one Brazilian congressman put it, we have a Swedish constitution with an economy of Mozambique. If those challenges are not daunting enough, President Cardoso must also cope with the problems of urban crime, of protecting the Amazon basin ecosystem, and the extensive poverty in Brazil's major metropolitan areas. He certainly has the credentials to perform more miracles. Born in 1931, he received degrees in sociology and social sciences from the University of Sao Paulo. He left his country following the military takeover in 1964 to return in 1968. He founded a think tank to serve as the center of opposition to the military government, but he was barred from teaching. After spending years on the lecture circuit in Latin America and the United States, he entered the Brazilian Senate as an alternate in 1982. He first joined the center-left Brazilian Democratic Movement Party in 1983, but 5 years later left that party to help form his current party, the Brazilian Social Democratic Party. He served under the previous administration as foreign minister before becoming finance minister. Today, he will tell us about the challenges Brazil faces as it moves toward the 21st century. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm Press Club welcome to the Honorable Fernando Henrique Cardoso, the President of Brazil. 800-500-9911. If you have any questions for our speaker, you'll find some cards on the table. Please write your questions on those cards, pass them up, and I will ask as many as time permits. Now I'd like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are mentioned. From your right, Paulo Henrique Amorim, U.S. Bureau Chief, TV Global Network of Brazil. Marlene Fernandez, Senior Washington Correspondent and Washington Bureau Chief, CNN Spanish. Paulo Sotero, o Estado de Sao Paulo. Flavia Secres, Journal do Brasil. Mel Levitsky, U.S. Ambassador to Brazil. Stan Kroc, News Editor for Business Week. Luis Felipe Lampreia, Brazilian Minister of External Relations. Skipping over our speaker for the moment, Mark Johnson, Media General News Service and Chairman of the National Press Club's Speakers Committee. Paulo Tarso Fletcher de Lima, Brazilian ambassador to the United States, David Anderson, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the member of our Speakers Committee who arranged today's luncheons. Thank you, David. Lisa Burgess of the Journal of Commerce, John Fogarty of Kiplinger's California Letter and past president of the National Press Club, Betsy Stewart, producer, NBC News, and Clay Chandler of the Washington Post. Our speaker today, it can be said, is a miracle worker of the highest rank. A year ago,